First she invaded my shelter. Then she invaded my heart. The wind howled through the Appalachian forest like a wounded animal. Cold, sharp, unrelenting. Nate adjusted the flap of his makeshift tarp door, tying it tighter against the chill. The small cave he had taken shelter in for the past 2 weeks had become a fragile sanctuary, dry, quiet, and most importantly, hidden. The forest was no longer just wilderness. It was war zone adjacent. 2 months ago, the sky split open and never truly closed. They came in waves, glowing ships tearing through clouds, releasing things that weren't entirely metal or flesh. Governments collapsed in days. Nate had been on a survival retreat in West Virginia when it started. He was lucky, or unlucky, depending on how you saw it. He crouched near the small fire pit in the back of the cave, feeding it pine cones and dry bark. The warmth was weak, but it was enough to keep the shadows at bay. That's when he heard it. A rustle. Not the wind. Not a squirrel. Heavy. Uncertain. Like a body collapsing through underbrush. Nate froze. Then it came again. Closer. Then silence. He grabbed his makeshift spear, a broken hiking pole with a hunting knife duct taped to the end, and crept toward the mouth of the cave. Darkness cloaked everything outside. His breath came out in fog. The forest was holding its breath too. Then something moved. A figure stumbled into the clearing, tall, humanoid, but wrong in all the right ways. She glowed faintly under the moonlight, skin as soft, mossy green. Long silver hair fell in thick strands over her shoulders, tangled with leaves. She was bleeding, a dark purple that shimmered unnaturally from a gash along her ribs. And behind her, a tail, fox-like, long, furred, twitching with exhaustion. Her ears, pointed and perked up like radar dishes, flinched at every sound. Nate should have run. Instead, he stepped forward. She looked up at him, pupils narrow and golden. And then, without a word, she collapsed. She was heavier than she looked. Nate dragged her inside, laying her near the fire. She wasn't wearing armor, just something like a gray flight suit torn in several places. Her breathing was shallow, chest rising in painful jolts. Every instinct told him this was a terrible idea, but there was something in her face. Something, too, human. He grabbed his first aid kit. Alcohol, gauze, painkillers. He didn't know what alien biology could tolerate, but she was bleeding out. No time to hesitate. As he cleaned the wound, she stirred and winced, but didn't attack. Her eyes cracked open for a moment. She looked straight at him. No words. Just a kind of recognition. Like she'd seen something like him before. Or maybe hoped to. He wrapped the gash as best he could, pulling a sleeping bag around her small frame. Her tail flicked once, lightly brushing his leg. He tensed, but she was already unconscious again. By morning, she hadn't moved. Nate brewed weak pine needle tea and placed it near her lips. To his shock, she drank. Just a little. Enough. Hours passed. She slept. He stayed nearby, not sure why. Every now and then, her tail would twitch or one of her ears would flick in her sleep, like a dream was chasing her. The fire kept burning. The wind outside kept screaming. But inside this damp, smoke-scented cave, something shifted. Quietly. As night approached again, she finally opened her eyes fully. Sat up. Alert. Nate didn't move. She looked at him. Then at the cave. Then at her wrap wound. And then she did the last thing he expected. She crawled across the cave floor, slowly, painfully, and curled up against him. Not a word spoken. Not a gesture of threat. Just her body pressing against his side, her head resting against his shoulder like she'd done it 100 times. Like this was home. Nate stiffened, breath caught in his throat. He'd seen things. Fought to survive. Lost friends. But nothing had prepared him for the feeling of another living soul choosing his presence over pain. He didn't speak. He just stayed still, letting her lean against him. Maybe she didn't know his language. Maybe she didn't need to. In the firelight, her hair shimmered like silver water, cascading over his arm. Her tail wrapped around both their legs like instinct. Her body was warm, impossibly warm, as if wired for heat, designed for closeness. He felt her breathing slow, and he realized something that should have scared him, but didn't. She wasn't afraid of him, and he wasn't afraid of her anymore either. The next morning, Nate woke with her still curled against him. Her breath was steady. Her skin, though still cold, had regained a faint inner glow, like moss under moonlight. He didn't know what to call her. He didn't even know if naming her made sense, but calling her she, in his head, didn't feel right anymore. He whispered, "Are you okay?" Her ears twitched. She slowly pulled away, golden eyes narrowing as she scanned the cave again. Her fingers brushed the gauze wrapped around her waist. She didn't speak, but her gaze settled on him for a long second, and she nodded. Not a human nod. A short, elegant dip of the head, but unmistakable in its meaning. Then came the sound. A pulse, like distant thunder, except steady, rhythmic, technological. Nate froze. She heard it too. Her ears snapped up, tail going stiff. Her head whipped toward the cave entrance, then to Nate. She grabbed his arm with surprising strength, pressing 2 fingers to her lips, a silent signal. "Quiet." "Got it," he whispered. The pulse grew louder, closer. Then a high-pitched whine sliced through the forest. Not natural, not human. They both moved. Nate doused the fire with dirt. She crawled to the cave wall, pressing herself into the shadows like she'd done this before. Nate followed her lead. He didn't ask questions. His instincts took over, and those instincts screamed that something bad was coming. A shape hovered just beyond the tree line. Smooth, metallic, the size of a van, with no visible engines. Its surface shimmered like hot oil in the sun. Beneath it, 3 insectoid legs lowered, scanning the forest floor with spiked probes. It was searching. Nate's pulse thudded in his ears. He looked at her. She was barely breathing, eyes locked on the creature like it was death incarnate. And maybe it was. The drone moved closer to the cave mouth. Its sensors passed right over the camouflage tarp. For a moment, Nate swore it would pierce right through. Then, a sudden chirp. The drone twitched, then ascended rapidly, vanishing above the trees like a ghost fleeing daylight. Silence. Minutes passed. She finally exhaled. So did Nate. "What the hell was that?" he muttered. She turned to him, slowly, pointed upward, toward the sky, then pointed to herself, and then to the direction the drone had vanished. He pieced it together. "You're being hunted." Her expression didn't change, but the silence that followed confirmed it. The rest of the day was spent reinforcing the cave. Nate found extra branches, tied them to the tarp, dug a deeper trench near the back in case they needed to hide. She watched him the whole time, sometimes tilting her head with curiosity, sometimes helping, wordlessly, but purposefully. He noticed how she moved. Graceful, almost too quiet, like a predator and prey in one body. Her tail always swayed gently, adjusting her balance. Her claws, retractable, he realized, only extended when she touched stone. And her eyes, always scanning, always reading him. She might not speak English, but she understood more than he expected. By nightfall, he sat across from her, sipping pine tea. He tried again. "You have a name?" She blinked, then touched her chest, slowly. "Syra," she said. The sound was soft, flowing, but with weight. "Syra," he repeated. She nodded. A tiny smile touched the corner of her lips. Then she reached toward him, hesitant, and touched his chest. He paused. "Nate." Her ears twitched. "Nate," she echoed, voice like wind through leaves. Something settled between them, the kind of fragile peace that forms only in the presence of shared danger. Later that night, as they lay in the dark, Cyrus suddenly sat up. Her ears flicked violently. Nate sat up too. "Another drone?" he whispered, but it wasn't. This sound was lower, heavier, distant metal dragging across rock. Cyrus stood, crouched low, and motioned for him to stay. Then she moved toward the cave mouth, silent as a shadow. Nate followed anyway, heart pounding. Outside, in the clearing, a shape emerged. Tall, broad, not human. It was humanoid, in the cruelest sense. Its armor was jagged and alive, pulsing with red veins of light. The face was a twisted mockery of a skull, smooth, black, emotionless. It moved with the certainty of a creature that had destroyed cities. Syra tensed beside him. The creature paused at the center of the clearing, then extended a clawed hand. A holographic map appeared, displaying an area with a blinking dot. Their cave. It knew. Nate turned to Syra, but she was already gone. He scanned and saw her circling the rock silently. She was baiting it, distracting it. He couldn't let her fight it alone. He grabbed his spear and slipped out the opposite side of the cave. The creature didn't see him coming, not until Nate drove the sharpened pole into the back of its knee joint. Sparks flew. The thing roared, spinning around, slamming Nate back into a tree with terrifying force. Then Syra leapt. She moved like lightning, her claws flashing, her tail coiling around the enemy's arm as she climbed it like a tree. She slashed across its neck, severing something vital. It dropped to one knee. Together, they took it down. Nate, bleeding from his lip, gasped for air as Syra knelt beside the body, eyes glowing fiercely. It wasn't dead, but it wasn't getting up either. Syra looked at him, breathing hard. "You okay?" he muttered. She didn't answer, just pressed her forehead against his. For a moment, neither spoke. Two strangers, from two worlds. And yet, in that dark forest clearing, they were only one thing. Alive. Together. The dead creature didn't stay dead for long. By morning, its body had begun to dissolve. Not rot, but melt. The armor cracked open like burnt metal, and what was inside wasn't bone. It pulsed, even in death. Nate and Syra stood over the remains. Nate gagged at the smell, metallic and wet. Syra knelt beside the corpse, her long fingers brushing over the tech embedded in its chest. Her face twisted, not in fear, but worry. She spoke in her own language, quiet and sharp. Then she looked at him and drew a circle in the air with her finger. Surveillance. More were coming. They spent the next hour dragging the body deeper into the forest. Nate covered it with rocks. Syra scattered the soil with branches, masking any signs of battle. It was risky, but letting the thing send a signal back. Worse. Back at the cave, she paced. Restless. Alert. Nate sat with his back to the wall, rubbing his sore ribs. The hit from the creature had bruised something deep. "You want to run?" he said. Syra looked over, understanding more in his voice than in his words. He pointed to the forest. "Out there. You'll die alone." She didn't flinch, but her expression softened. She pointed to him, then tapped her chest. A silent message. "You're the reason I'm alive." Nate exhaled. "Then we need a better plan than hiding in this hole." By midday, the temperature dropped. Snow began to fall, light at first, then fast and thick. The forest became a blur of white and gray. Their cave, once nearly invisible, now left clear tracks in and out. They worked fast, covering prints, brushing new snow across their path. Then came the voice. Mechanical, garbled, but speaking English. Human presence detected. "Return the fugitive. You will not be harmed." It echoed from somewhere deep in the trees, broadcast from a speaker drone, maybe, or one of those armored hunters. Nate stiffened. "They're not just after you anymore." Syra stood beside him, eyes narrowed, tail low. Then the voice changed. A different tone. A woman's voice. Fluent English. "Nathaniel Carter. Your name is known. Your DNA is on file. Surrender the Xeno. The sentence for aiding her is termination." He blinked. "They know my name?" She turned to him, urgent now. She grabbed his hand, not gently, and pulled him into the cave. She dug in her gear pouch and pulled out a small, broken disc. Pressed a few buttons. A hologram flickered to life. It showed Earth, dotted with red zones. Then zoomed in on a facility, underground, ringed by defenses. English words scrolled across it. Category 5 detainment. Species interaction forbidden. Xenoclass. Fox Alpha. Nate stared. "That's you, isn't it?" Syra didn't answer. She just looked ashamed. He shook his head. "Why? What did you do?" She looked down, ran a claw along her side, near the bandage. She mimed someone, herself, standing between two others. A flash of movement. A wound. A betrayal. Then she looked back at him. She hadn't invaded Earth. She had defected. That night, the snow kept falling. The cold pressed into the cave like a ghost. Nate shivered in his sleeping bag, ribs aching, and tried not to think about the voice calling his name through the trees. Syra sat across from him, tail coiled around her legs, watching the entrance. "You don't sleep much," he said. She pointed to her ears. "Always listening." He sat up, wincing. "If I leave, they'll stop hunting me." She didn't answer. "Would you go?" he asked. "If I asked." Still silence. Then she crawled across the cave again, same as the first night, and curled up beside him, her face close to his. She pressed 2 fingers to his chest, then to hers, then intertwined them. Nate closed his eyes. Even if the whole world was hunting them, she wasn't leaving. The next day it was worse. 2 drones circled overhead. One passed directly above the cave, stopping briefly. Nate held his breath. Syra slid her claws from her fingers. Then the drone moved on. Not by chance. It was mapping the area, preparing a net. "We can't stay," Nate said. Syra didn't argue. They packed what little they had: dried food, tools, one flashlight with half a battery. Syra took the broken drone tech and tucked it into her suit. She handed Nate one of her own weapons, a compact, silent energy blade, smooth as obsidian. They stepped into the forest just before dusk. The snow had stopped, but the cold remained brutal. Every step was effort. They moved fast but quiet, Syra always 5 paces ahead, tail swaying like a signal flag. Then they found it, a trail of footprints. Not theirs. Humanoid. Heavy. 3 sets. "They've landed ground troops," Nate whispered. Syra nodded grimly. And one of the sets, the largest, was dragging something. Claw marks. Another of her kind. She ran forward, low to the ground. Nate followed, breath fogging with every step. The trail led them to a half-collapsed bunker, old, overgrown with moss and ice. Inside was a nightmare. One of Syra's species, male, younger, was strapped to a chair, shivering, body covered in restraints that glowed faintly red. The room smelled of burned ozone. A human soldier, if he could still be called that, stood nearby. Cybernetic implants crawled over half his face. The rest of him was armored, heavy and dark. Syra froze. Her claws clenched. Rage filled her eyes. Then she looked at Nate. This was the cost of running. This was the kind of death waiting for both of them if they got caught. And now, she had to decide. Save the prisoner and expose them, or leave and stay free. Nate whispered, "We can't win this fight." But she was already moving, and Nate, already reaching for the blade she gave him. The bunker was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that meant someone was listening. Syra crept forward, her body pressed to the frozen earth like she was part of it. Nate followed close behind, blade in hand, trying to control his breathing. His ribs still ached. His fingers were numb. But what burned more was the look on her face. This wasn't just rescue. This was personal. Inside the bunker, the cybernetic soldier stood with his back to the prisoner, typing commands into a floating interface. Red holographic data streamed around his hands. The young male, the other of Syra's kind, was unconscious, barely breathing. His wrists were scorched where the restraints met flesh. Nate whispered, "We don't have time. We take out the soldier, get the kid, and run." Syra didn't answer. Her claws were already extended. She signaled, "Go left." Distraction. She'd come from the right. Nate nodded. He broke a stick underfoot. The soldier spun instantly, drawing a jagged weapon from his side, a plasma rod, humming with violet energy. Unauthorized bioform detected. He growled, "Half machine. Stand down." Nate took a step back, hands raised, pretending to surrender. That was when Syra struck. She launched from the shadows like a spring trap, crashing into the soldier from the side. Her claws sank into the joints of his armor, tearing at the exposed machinery. The man screamed, more static than voice. He whipped his arm around, slamming Syra into the wall. Sparks flew. Nate charged in, blade raised, driving it into the base of the man's spine. The weapon hissed through metal and flesh alike. The soldier convulsed, then collapsed, twitching. Syra dropped to one knee, panting hard. "You okay?" Nate asked, grabbing her by the arm. She nodded once, teeth clenched, but her tail was limp. She was hurt again, not as bad as before, but worse than she wanted him to know. They turned to the prisoner. His chest was barely rising. Whatever those restraints were, they were draining more than just energy. Syra knelt beside him, murmuring something in her language. Soft. Familiar. His ears twitched. Alive. She disabled the restraints with a tool from her belt. As soon as they powered down, his body sagged forward into her arms. Then a siren went off. Nate jumped. Motion sensors. Syra pointed upward. A faint red dot blinked in the ceiling. A camera lens. Damn it, Nate hissed. They had 30 seconds. Maybe less. He slung the injured alien's arm over his shoulder, almost collapsing from the weight. Syra grabbed his other side, stabilizing both of them. They moved fast, out of the bunker, into the forest. Behind them, a mechanical howl tore through the trees. The hunters were coming. They made it half a mile before the sky lit up red. One of the hunter drones descended like a god of war, its body pulsing with crimson light, blades spinning from its arms. Syra spun to face it, standing between the drone and Nate, claws out, tail flared. "I can help," Nate shouted. She shook her head. This wasn't a human fight, but he didn't listen. As the drone rushed them, Nate threw himself forward, slamming the energy blade into its midsection while Syra tore into its arm. It lashed out, slicing Nate's shoulder. Blood splattered against the snow. He fell, screaming. Syra went feral. She screamed, a sound unlike anything he'd heard from her, and launched herself into the drone's face, clawing until sparks burst from its head and it dropped like dead metal. Breathing hard, she turned to Nate, who was clutching his arm. She fell beside him, pressing her forehead to his. He didn't need words. "You shouldn't have done that. But also, thank you." They found a cave that night, smaller, colder. Not a shelter, a hiding place. Nate bandaged his own arm. Syra attended to the younger male, feeding him a blue paste from her suit. He stirred once, looked at her, and whispered her name. "Syra." She blinked hard. Nate watched her. "Your brother." She nodded. "Once." He sat beside her, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. "They're going to keep coming, aren't they?" Her eyes didn't leave the boy. "Yes. You knew this. And still you stayed with me." She finally turned to him. Her voice, rough but certain. "You were worth staying for." Nate's chest tightened. She reached up and touched the side of his face, gentle, despite the claws. Her thumb traced his cheek like she was memorizing it. Then she leaned forward, just an inch, and rested her forehead against his again. It wasn't a kiss. It was something older, more honest. Outside, the snow kept falling. The hunters were out there, but so were they, and they weren't done yet. If you've ever rooted for an impossible love, one with claws, scars, and war on all sides, this is just the beginning. Subscribe to the channel. There's more coming. The cold crept into Nate's bones like a slow poison. They had no fire, no food, barely any light. Just the sound of the wind outside the cave and the shallow breathing of Syra's brother. "Tear," she'd said. He was alive, but barely. His skin had taken on a faint gray hue. His tail twitched in his sleep, ears drooping like a dying flame. Nate sat with his back to the wall, cradling his injured shoulder. The cut had clotted, but the pain was constant, throbbing. He could barely move his arm. He watched Syra kneel beside her brother, her hands trembling as she cleaned a burn wound along his side. Her expression was focused, but haunted. "This was a rescue," he said quietly. But it wasn't a win. She didn't answer. Didn't need to. Her silence was soaked in guilt, not just for what had happened, but for what was coming. Because now that she had saved him, she knew exactly what she had to lose. By morning, Nate was delirious from the fever. His body felt like fire under his skin. He tried to sit up, but collapsed into the dirt, breath hitching. Syra rushed to him, eyes wide with panic. He heard her voice, words in her language, but they sounded distant, like echoes underwater. He caught a glimpse of her claw slicing open a pouch. Bitter liquid poured into his mouth. He coughed, gagged but swallowed. Then darkness. Then silence. When he woke again, it was night. The fever had broken, but his body felt hollow, as if something inside had burned away. Syra was there, sitting beside him with her tail curled over his legs. Her head was down. Asleep, maybe. Tear lay farther away, wrapped in layers of torn thermal blankets. "You saved me," Nate whispered, voice raw. Syra stirred. Her eyes opened, glowing faintly. "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. "You knew the medicine might not work on me." "Yes. But you gave it to me anyway." She nodded once. He swallowed hard. "You didn't have to." She tilted her head slightly. "You gave me a place to live when I had no sky. I will not let you die in the dirt." The words hit deeper than he expected. She touched his arm gently, inspecting the bandages. Her claws had been filed blunt for this. He noticed that now. A deliberate choice. "I will carry you, if needed," she said. Nate chuckled weakly. "Please don't. I'd rather crawl." For the first time in days, her smile cracked through. Tiny. Real. The next afternoon, they moved. Slowly. Tear was stable, able to walk with help, but the cold was worsening. The air felt heavier now, charged, as if the forest itself knew what was coming. Every tree, every frozen stream, whispered, "You're being watched." And they were. Syra pointed out the scout marks. Drones had passed nearby. Not long ago. 3 units. Circle formation. Heat-seeking. We have 2 days, she said. Maybe 1. They found a cave system deeper in the mountains, abandoned, collapsed halfway inside, but with narrow tunnels that could be sealed if needed. It wasn't safe, but it was invisible. They set up what little gear they had. Nate rested. Tear slept. And Syra? She stared into the dark with her claws resting on her thighs. Something was breaking in her, and Nate saw it. That night, he joined her outside the cave. Snow fell again, light now, like ash from a dying fire. He stood beside her. "Why did you really come to Earth?" he asked. Syra took a long breath. Her voice was low, distant. "My kind were told to conquer, to cleanse. But I saw your world, and I could not." "Did you refuse to fight?" "I did worse," she said. "I helped a human." Nate's eyes widened. "Who?" "A child. Alone in a burned village. I hid him. Fed him. One of my officers found out. Ordered me to kill him to correct the record." She turned toward him. "I killed the officer instead." Silence. "That's why they're hunting you," Nate said. She nodded. "Not because I defected. Because I disobeyed." He looked at her, really looked. Not as a soldier. Not as an alien. But as a person who made a choice. The same choice he'd made in the cave, when he helped her. Even knowing it would cost him everything. And suddenly he understood. This wasn't just about survival. This was about defiance. About love, yes, but a love born in fire. One that chose to exist in a world where everything said it shouldn't. He stepped closer. Syra looked up at him. "You don't owe me anything," Nate said. "But if you stay, I'll keep fighting, even if it kills me." She touched his hand. "I'm not leaving." That night, they didn't sleep. They sat together by the cave mouth, watching the stars blink through snow clouds. And above them, far in the sky, a faint red glow. The hunter ships. A signal. It was getting closer. But so were they. And whatever came next, they would face it together. The mountain wind howled like a beast in mourning. Inside the cave, the cold was absolute. Not just temperature. Silence had become cold, too. Every word not spoken felt like another log missing from the fire they didn't have. But they were still alive. 3 days since the last drone sighting. 4 since the rescue. Tear was stable now. He could walk short distances, eat solid food, and even make dry, sarcastic grunts, which Nate took as a sign of improvement. Still, none of them felt safe. Syra hadn't spoken more than necessary. She spent her time sharpening weapons, reinforcing the cave walls, carving glyphs into stone. Protection marks, Nate guessed. Alien wards. Or maybe just something to keep her mind from spiraling. Nate watched her work in silence. He wanted to reach her, to say something that mattered. But words weren't enough anymore. Not here. So he did the only thing he could. He helped. He rearranged the gear to form better insulation. He caught snowmelt and bent tin cans for drinking water. He taught Tear how to use a human compass, and Tear taught him a few alien words in return. Kava meant shelter. Thyron meant pain. Okinai meant stay with me. Syra noticed. That night, as Nate sat by the entrance scanning the stars, Syra joined him. She didn't speak at first, just sat close, shoulder against shoulder, tail resting beside his leg. Finally, she broke the silence. Tear asked me if I trust you. Nate glanced at her. "What did you say?" I said, "I sleep beside you every night, don't I?" He smiled. "That's either romantic or terrifying." She chuckled softly, a sound that wrapped around his chest. "I didn't think trust was possible anymore," she added. "Not after what I did. Not after what I lost." Nate turned to her. "You didn't lose. You chose." Syra met his gaze. "And so did you." For a moment, nothing else existed. Just them. The stars. The quiet promise that tomorrow could be better, if they made it that far. The next morning, Tear brought them something unexpected. A signal. He'd been tinkering with a salvage drone core, trying to track enemy patrol frequencies. But he found something else. A distress beacon. Alien, yes, but not from their enemies. "Resistance," Syra whispered, eyes widening. Nate leaned over. "Like a rebel group?" "Scattered. Hidden. Most thought dead." She traced the beacon's coordinates on a hand-drawn map. It was buried deep in the valley, past enemy territory, through unstable terrain. It was a suicide run, or a lifeline. Nate stared at the map. "If we get there, what happens?" "They might extract us," Cyrus said, "or give us refuge. Or they might kill me for what I used to be." She didn't say the last part dramatically. She said it like someone who'd made peace with a cost. Nate stepped closer. Then I'm going with you. Tara spoke up, in broken English. You are idiot. Nate laughed. Fluent already. Syra smiled, but her eyes stayed serious. If we go, she said, you may not come back. Nate looked at her and said 2 words he hadn't said yet. I'm sure. They left that afternoon. The journey was brutal. Snow gave way to mud. Ice cracked underfoot. Strange storm clouds rolled in from the north, pulsing with pink and green lightning. Alien weather, warborn and sick. They moved fast but cautious. Avoided heat scans. Traveled at night. Slept in hollowed logs, under fallen trees, in ruins of forgotten cabins. And in every one of those places, Nate and Syra grew closer. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. A glance. A shared flask of melted snow. A moment where she pressed her forehead to his, not as ritual, but to ground herself. They weren't just allies now. They were each other's reason. On the 6th night, a blizzard trapped them inside an abandoned ranger tower. The wind screamed. The walls shook. Tara slept below, curled near the stove. Nate and Syra sat upstairs, wrapped in every blanket they could find. She leaned into him, not from cold, but from something else. He held her close, her tail wrapping around his leg. He felt her breathing, slow and steady, against his chest. She whispered something in her language. He didn't understand the words, but he felt the meaning. He kissed her forehead, and for the first time since the world ended, neither of them felt alone. By the time the storm passed, they were only 2 miles from the beacon. And then came the explosion. A flash of red light lit up the sky behind them. Syra spun around. They found us. From the hills, shapes emerged. Hunters, 4 of them. 2 drones in the air. 1 mech unit. Tara pulled his energy weapon. Nate readied the blade Syra gave him. But this time, Syra didn't move. She looked at the enemy, then looked at Nate, and said 1 word. Run. No. Nate replied instantly. She placed both hands on his chest. You're the only one they don't need alive. He froze. Syra turned to Tara. Protect him. And then, before either of them could stop her, she ran straight into the open, drawing their attention, drawing their fire. Tails of plasma lit the snow behind her. Drones screamed overhead. Tara grabbed Nate. We go. Now. Nate looked back once. Syra had vanished over the ridge, but her voice stayed with him. Okinai, stay with me. The air smelled like burning snow. Nate ran. Fast. Too fast for someone bleeding and half frozen, but adrenaline made liars of the body. Tara was just ahead, limping but pushing forward. He carried the signal unit. The beacon was close. Nate could hear the soft ping of the frequency pulsing louder with each step, but he couldn't stop thinking about Syra. He had seen her vanish over the ridge, drawing every drone and mech after her. Alone. It should have been him. They reached a frozen ravine, the final valley. At the center, nestled between 2 ridges of shattered rock and wind-beaten pine trees, was a half-buried structure, ancient, alien, and glowing faintly with white light. The beacon. Tara dropped to his knees and tapped the controls. The structure responded, a hiss of steam, a pulse of heat. Then it spoke, a voice like fractured glass and static. Signal recognized. Designation, Syra. Initiating evac protocol. But Syra wasn't there, and the countdown had already started. Nate turned back toward the ridge. His hands clenched. I'm going back. Tara grabbed his arm. No. She gave her chance. She gave me a reason to live. Nate snapped. I'm not losing her to save myself. And then, an explosion rocked the forest behind them. Trees snapped like matchsticks. One of the drones flew backward, smoking, spiraling out of the sky in pieces. Nate's heart jumped. She was still fighting. He didn't think. He ran. Back toward the smoke. Toward the storm. The snow had turned red. Nate crested the ridge and nearly slipped on blood-flecked ice. Below him, a clearing on fire. The remains of 1 drone smoldered in the snow, sparking wildly. A second drone hovered above, scanning with brutal precision. And in the middle of it all, Syra, bleeding, on 1 knee, but still alive. She faced the final mech, a 2-story armored monstrosity that resembled a cross between a gorilla and a tank. Its limbs crackled with blue energy. Its head was an orb of steel. Syra was weaponless. Her claws shattered, tail wounded, but her eyes blazed. She roared, not a scream of rage, but defiance. It echoed across the trees. and the mech charged. Nate didn't hesitate. He sprinted into the battlefield, grabbing a shattered drone wing as a shield, diving between Syra and the mech's path just as it raised its arm. The impact sent him flying. He hit the ground hard, dazed, everything ringing. But when he opened his eyes, Syra was above him. Blood streaked her side. Her breathing was labored, but she held his face gently in her hands. "You idiot," she whispered. He smiled, coughing blood. "You were supposed to run." She leaned in, forehead against his. Her voice broke. "I couldn't." Then she stood and did the unthinkable. She activated the detonation core from the drone remains. The blue light pulsed in her hands. She had 10 seconds. The mech ready to strike. Syra turned to Nate, just once, and mouthed a single word. "Okinai." And then she charged. The core exploded as she leapt into the mech's chest. A wave of white-hot light consumed the clearing. Trees flattened. Fire ripped across the snow. And then, silence. Ash falling like rain. Nate woke hours later under rubble. His hearing was gone. His vision blurry. His arm shattered. But he moved. He crawled across scorched ground, screaming without a voice. Calling for her. For Syra. But the battlefield was empty. Only scorched metal, burned blood, and a single, green-tinted claw, half buried in the snow. He collapsed, and wept like something had been torn from him. Because it had. 3 weeks later, the snow was gone. The valley had begun to thaw. Frozen rivers cracked open like veins rediscovering flow. Trees, blackened by fire, stood stubbornly among new shoots of green. Life was crawling back, 1 inch at a time. Nate sat alone on the edge of a collapsed lookout tower, one arm in a sling, the other clutching a torn notebook. His left ear was deaf. His right eye still flickered with blurred vision from the blast. He'd lost 2 fingers on his left hand. He barely resembled a man who had once hidden in a cave with a tarp for a door. But he was alive. That mattered. Barely. Every night, he dreamed of her. Syra, eyes burning, claws raised, that final word on her lips. "Okinai, stay with me." He had, and she hadn't. The irony crushed him. "Wire," he whispered. The wind didn't answer. Neither did the radio. Tear hadn't returned. After the explosion, a scout team from the Resistance had found Nate unconscious. The extraction beacon had pulled a transport ship down for a short window. They'd taken him, alone, with no sign of Syra or her body. An honorable death, someone had said. A warrior's end. But Nate didn't believe it. Not fully. Not yet. He spent his days helping build what the Resistance called Outpost Horizon, a buried shelter network, hidden from scans. Half tech, half muscle. Survivors of every species lived there. Humans, defected aliens, hybrid engineers, medics, orphans. People who had lost everything and still chose to help others survive. Nate worked the radios. Learned to walk again. Stopped bleeding in the middle of the night. But the ache in his chest never left. He would find her name scrawled on the walls. Soiree, etched by others who'd heard her story. A ghost hero. A rebel. A shield between one world and another. She had become legend. And Nate couldn't bear it. Because to him, she wasn't a legend. She was a home. One night, as he prepared for sleep, something blinked on the monitor. A faint ping. Coordinates. Off-grid. No ID. Untraceable. He leaned forward. Scanned again. Still there. Just one word. Okinai. His heart stopped. The frequency was alien, not Resistance. Not enemy. Her encryption. He bolted from his chair, stumbling through the halls, straight to Tear's quarters. The younger alien, fully recovered now, part of Outpost Command, answered with a raised brow. "She's alive," Nate said. Tear narrowed his eyes. "You're sure?" "I don't care if I'm not. I'm going." Tear stared at him, then sighed. "I'll prepare transport." At dawn, the ship lifted from the hidden hangar like a whisper in reverse. Nate sat alone in the cockpit, map shaking in his hands. The sky was cloudless. For the first time in months, no drones hovered overhead. Just a blank horizon, and one fragile hope. His fingers rested on the comms button. He wanted to speak. But what do you say to someone who gave up everything for you? Who vanished in fire, but might still be waiting? He looked at the map. One word echoed in his mind, again and again. Okinai. The shuttle sliced through the clouds, following coordinates no one else had access to. Nate's hands trembled over the controls, eyes flicking between the barren ridgelines and the blinking signal that had pulled him out of his grave of grief. It was irrational. It was reckless. And it was hope. The landscape below was scarred, not by time, but by decisions. Trees still bent from plasma burns. Earth still cracked from old landings. War left fingerprints that no storm could erase. And yet, something green was growing again. Life insisted on continuing. Just like Syra. He landed the shuttle in a narrow canyon, half buried by vines and rockfall. The signal was close, within walking distance. He stepped out, breathing in the dry mountain air, colder than expected. His injured shoulder ached. The wind cut into his skin. But he moved forward, driven by something stronger than pain. At the mouth of the canyon, he found it. A small shelter, built into the side of the stone wall. Barely visible. Seamless. Camouflaged with purpose. He approached, hands raised. No weapons. No shield. Just his heart on the outside. A faint blue light scanned him. Then the door slid open. Inside was silence. Then a shadow moved. He stopped breathing, and she stepped into view. Syra looked older. Not in years, but in weight. Scars lined her arms. Her tail had a split near the tip, fur grown uneven. One ear was partially torn. And yet, she stood tall. Steady. Still her. Still his. Nate opened his mouth, and nothing came out. He didn't need to speak. She crossed the room in 3 steps and wrapped her arms around him, holding him like she had in the cave, like he was still shivering in the cold. He pulled her close, felt her heartbeat. Warm. Alive. Real. They stayed that way for a long time. 2 soldiers who stopped fighting. 2 fugitives who stopped running. 2 souls who refused to believe that love was only for the peaceful. Later, they sat outside on the edge of the cliff, watching the sunset spill orange and red over the wreckage of a world that still hadn't healed. But they had, piece by piece. She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. He smiled faintly. Why didn't you contact me sooner? She looked up. I didn't think I was whole enough to be found. He nodded. Neither was I. Syra traced a line on his hand, the one with 2 missing fingers. This, she said softly, is what love costs. Nate looked at her, and I'd pay it again. Every time. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Oh, keen eye." He didn't translate it. He just held her closer. Because in a universe built on war, they had found the rarest thing of all. Someone who chose them back. Not just once, but always. 6 months later, the war still raged in distant parts of the planet. But on that quiet mountainside, where the wind scraped stone and the green fought to return, there was peace. The shelter Syra once built to hide had become a home. Solar panels, water filters, a long-range transmitter, and, at its heart, 2 sleeping mats layered with blankets, side by side. Simple, warm, alive. Nate woke early every morning. Not out of fear, out of rhythm, out of purpose. Sometimes he made tea from roots Syra had taught him were safe. Other days, she woke him first, not with words, but with a brush of her tail or a whispered phrase in her native tongue, which he was slowly learning. They didn't need to talk much. Just being there said everything. Tear visited every full moon. He brought updates, replacement parts, new seeds. He talked about how the world was changing. More humans joining the defectors. More hunters walking away from orders. More outposts forming, quiet sanctuaries between war zones. But Nate and Syra, they already had theirs. One clear night, they sat on the edge of the cliff again. Same rock, same view. Syra held something in her hands, a small crystal shard, polished and wrapped in a braided cord. She placed it around Nate's neck without ceremony and said, "In my culture, this means you survived me." Nate smiled. "Is that good or bad?" "It means that if I fall, you carry my name, my failures, my story. So it's heavy. Only if you forget why." He looked at her and saw everything again. The ship crash. That first night in the shelter. The escape. The kiss that never happened, but still lived between them. The explosion. The return. And the miracle. "I don't forget," he said. Not for a second. She leaned in and touched her forehead to his, the same way they had since the beginning. Only now, without fear it might be the last time. Down in the valley, far below, the lights of another shelter flickered on. Life spreading. New beginnings. And up on the ridge, 2 silhouettes sitting in silence. A human. A fox-tailed alien with battle scars and eyes like golden fire. Closer than war would ever allow. Stronger than the world expected. More real than any legend. If this story hit you deep, share it. Drop a comment. What would you have done in Nate's place? And if you still believe in impossible love, subscribe to the channel. The next story starts when this one ends.